We are continuing our look at the teachings of Jesus as we look at the parables around all of this and what they may mean for our lives. And so in doing so, this week we're going to continue in chapter 25 where we left off 2 weeks ago. Chapter 25, verse 14 through verse 30, and let's listen for a word from God. Again, it'll be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents of money, to another 2 talents, and to another 1 talent, each according to his ability. And then he went on his journey. The man who had received the 5 talents went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 more. So also the one with the 2 talents gained 2 more. But the man who had received the 1 talent went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received the 5 talents brought 5 more. He said, "Master," he said, "you entrusted me with 5 talents. See, I have gained you 5 more." His master replied, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness." The man with the 2 talents also came. "Master," he said, "you entrusted me with 2 talents. See, I have gained 2 more." His master replied, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness." And then the man who had received the 1 talent came. "Master," he said, "I knew you were a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your talent in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you." And his master replied, "You wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. Well, then you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. Take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. For everyone who has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken from him. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Let's pray. Gracious God, often you have a harsh word. It seems so harsh in the midst of knowing you as a graceful, grace-filled, loving, caring Creator. So, Father, help us to open our eyes this morning and see your truth. Help us to open our ears that we hear and understand, but more importantly than in seeing and hearing, we open our hearts to receiving your truth, that we become a changed people. In all and through all, Lord, may you and you alone be glorified. For we pray this in your most precious and holy name. Amen. There was a story recently about 2 men who crashed their private plane on a South Pacific island. And one of the men brushed himself off and immediately began running all over the island to see if they had any chance of survival. When he returned back to his friend, he rushed up to him and said, "The island is uninhabited. There's no food or water. We're going to die." The other man just leaned back against the fuselage of the wrecked plane, folded his arms in response, said, "No, we're not. I make over $100,000 a week." The first man grabbed his friend and shook him. "Listen, we're on a deserted island. We're doomed." The other man, unruffled, responded, "It's okay. I make over $100,000 a week." Mystified, the first man, taken aback by such an answer, again responded, "For the last time, I'm telling you, we are lost. It doesn't matter how much money you make, because no one around to help us." Still unfazed, the first man looked at the other guy directly in the eye and said, "Don't make me say this again. I make over $100,000 a week, and I tithe, my pastor will find me. This is often a text that you'll read or be read to you on Sunday mornings in light of a stewardship sermon. Have you heard that word before, stewardship? What does that mean? Well, I'll tell you, don't answer. It usually means, it's budget time and we've got to fund the budget, right? You're afraid to say yes, right? It was for me, growing up Presbyterian in South Alabama. Our budget year ended December 31st, so long about November, we had Stewardship Week or Stewardship Month. We'd have banners up and things, and everybody's reminding us there was sometimes a full canvas of going to visit the members to see how much they're going to tithe when we had to write it down and put it into people. How many of you remember things like that? I understand it's really not the history here, but that's great in some ways. But put that aside. And then there'd be a sermon or two or three about how we need to tithe. And this was one of them I remember from the tithing. I remember that part of hearing the 5 talents, the 2 talents, the 1 talent, and going, oh, I must give a tithe. I didn't know what tithing was. I thought it just meant an offering. It means 10%, by the way, if you don't know. I have to give a tithe, which, to a kid, I don't have anything anyway, so that's okay. But we had to give a tithe. And it was often told that way in a way of, oh, I understand this. I have to give my money to God. And I never got a right understanding of it till years later. I heard 2 things. I had a seminary professor who taught a whole course on stewardship that changed, and you'll hear a lot of what he had to say in this sermon. But on top of that, I heard Dave Ramsey put it in a way that went, oh, I get that now. Dave Ramsey is how many people have ever heard of Dave Ramsey? Okay, so I don't need to tell you. Dave Ramsey is a financial guru who teaches how to handle money God's way. And he said when he became a Christian, after he'd made millions of dollars and lost it all, and then found himself in a deep, dark pit, reached for God and discovered Jesus Christ and gave his life. After he became a born-again Christian, he began looking in the Bible, reading his Bible, studying it, trying to figure things out. And he said, oh, I'm supposed to give money to God because God needs my money. That was his first take. And then he said, after he kept reading the Bible more and more, he came to an understanding that God doesn't need his money. He said, God is the owner of 1,000 cattle on 1,000 hillsides. He said, God doesn't need your money. In fact, he says, God doesn't need your money. If God wanted your money, he would take it and there'd be a little black smudge right where you were. Kind of scary, isn't it? God's not that way, but he could do that. So Dave Ramsey said, then it hit me, okay, God doesn't need my money. Oh, I get it. The church needs my money. And then he said, after a little more research, he realized that giving, God's call for the individual to give, was not about the church needing money. He would say, guess what? The church doesn't need your money. He said, to which most of the elders go, wait, what? Don't say that. But it's true, we don't give to fund the budget. That's something we learned in stewardship. You see, in our stewardship course, we learned that giving to God was not about funding the budget. If the church makes it about that, we have it backwards. And I think that this text speaks right to the heart of that. That giving by the individual has nothing to do with the budget of the church. In fact, we learned in that stewardship course that money follows mission. Where people see the work of God moving and growing, they want to give out of the goodness of God to that. But this text speaks to the individual's giving and how the individual gives. A couple weeks ago, we started this text, chapter 25. Audrey taught us that Jesus was comparing the coming of the bridegroom to Jesus' coming again. That no one would know when he'd come. In fact, chapter 25, verse 13 said, therefore, this is the verse right before we start this text, therefore, keep watch, because you do not know the day or the hour. And then if you go a little fast forward from where we ended today to the end of chapter 25, you'll find the next piece that Jesus teaches on is on the sheep and the goat. How many of you know that one? Okay, good. That's a scary text too, isn't it? Because it says, here, come, some of you are sheep and you're going to enter into my kingdom because you've done this, this, and this. You've taken care of these people, taken care of me, you fed me, you gave me water. And they said, Lord, when did we ever do that? And he said, that which you've done for the least of these, you do for me. And likewise, he said, some of the people, here, you're going to enter in, there's going to be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Once again, he says something like that. And because you didn't do this, and you didn't do this, and you didn't do this for me. He said, what? When did we ever not offer those to you? He said, that which you did to the least of these, you did to me. So I think this text, when you take it in light of that whole picture, we don't know when Jesus is coming. We know the outcome of our actions. What should they be about? And the question we're left with our text this morning is, what will happen? What will it be like, rather, when Jesus comes again? What will his kingdom look like? And who will you be in that kingdom? The parable of today as well is about, will we be ready? So as we walk through this passage this morning, we'll see some concepts that help us prepare for his kingdom living. And the first concept is this: what we have is not ours. Verse 14 continues by saying that this man who was getting ready for a journey called his servants and entrusted his property to them. And it was common back in that day for wealthy people, landowners, to call in some servants and say, here's a list of things I want you to take care of, as well as, here is my money, take care of it the way I would take care of it. Invest it. They were expected to bring a return on what they'd been handed over to them. Given the uncertainties of transportation in those days, they really didn't know when the landowner, the master, would return. And so they needed to make sure they took care of it to be ready for when he did return. Because any time, it wasn't like today where you go off and I'm going to be gone for 2 weeks, I'll be back at this time, my flight comes. It wasn't that. Even if they knew they got delayed, they couldn't just send a text. There was no telling when the master would show up again. And there was no doubt in the minds of these servants that the property and the money still belonged to him. They were the masters. Let me change that. The stuff given to them belonged to the master. They were the possessors, but not the owners. Their job was to manage what they'd been given. Likewise, we must remember that everything we have has been given to us by the Lord. Listen to what it says in the 24th Psalm. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. Haggai says this, the silver is mine and the gold is mine, declares the Lord Almighty. He has the rights, I have the responsibility. He is the master, I'm the manager. He is the sovereign, I am the servant. Kingdom living means allowing this basic principle to permeate your thinking. You don't really own anything. I know. You own your house, right? Unless the bank still has a mortgage on it. But are you going to take it with you? You own your cars. It's really hard for us in a free market society that we live in to do away with the concept of ownership. And yet when we really think about it, hardly anything except your spirit is going anywhere at the end of it, right? We don't own anything. Our houses, our cars, our clothes, our families, every possession we have doesn't belong to us. We really don't own anything. When we start to understand this concept that it is all His, it changes how we think. We go from giving to God to giving back to God. I liken this at the first service. If you think about those I'm one of those people who used to get really excited about, the federal government's giving me money back when I do my tax return. Oh, they're giving me money. Until someone reminded me, it was your money to begin with. Right? It's the same kind of concept. God, of course, God doesn't get all excited because you're giving him money. But it's his money anyways, right? Concept number 2. We're given what we can handle. In verse 15, we see the master gave some talents to 3 of his servants. To one he gave 5 talents of money. To another one he gave 2 talents. To another 1, each according to his ability, the text says. Then he went on a journey. We need to pause here for a minute to recognize what really is meant by a talent. And in our present day understanding, a talent was a measure of weight. It was one way to take it. Another way to take it is it's also a measure of time of employment, which really inflates these numbers. So we're not going to look at that one. We're going to go with just the talent as being a weight. And a talent was 1,200 ounces of whatever. So here's, if we take, it could be copper, silver, or gold. So we're going to go to the middle of the road, one of the lowest ways to evaluate it. So this is going to be one of the lower ways of looking. And so if you look at it, spot price on Thursday was $30.40 an ounce for silver. 1,200 ounces then turns into $36,480. And so 5 talents that the master gave his first servant is equal to $182,400. To the second guy, 2 talents, which would work out to be $72,960. And the third steward got just 1 talent, which of course you know is $36,480. And even though there's a big difference between those amounts, the 5 talents and the 1 talent, the guy who received the 1 talent still has a pretty good amount of money, right? Say yes. Okay. Just make sure you're tracking with me. I know in today's world, for some of us, that's a small amount. If you go to some parts of this world, $36,000 is a year's wage, okay, or more. The key here is that each servant received talents according to his ability. Your responsibility is tied to your ability. And this is very interesting. God's kingdom's purposes do not operate according to what is fair, but rather what God believes is best. We're so used to saying, well, that's not fair. You look at, why did the one guy get only 1 talent? Well, because God knows what's best. You have what you have because God gave it to you. And he expects you to manage his gifts within the boundaries of ability that he has wired into you. Paul says it this way in 1 Corinthians. There are different kinds of gifts, service, and workings. And the Holy Spirit distributes these responsibilities, quote, to each one just as he determines, unquote. See, God entrusts different stuff to different people according to his sovereign purposes. In other words, he knows what we can handle. Our job is to be faithful in whatever amount we have to work with. Do you trust that God knows more about you than you even know about yourself? Concept number 3. We must invest what we've been given. Verse 16 tells us that a man who received 5 talents went at once and invested it and put his money to work and gained 5 more back. He didn't waste any time, but immediately went and to work on the investment strategy and doubled his master's portfolio. I'd like to learn what he did. The guy who got 2 talents did the same thing. Only the text doesn't say he went to work at once like the first guy. We do know that he worked hard, however, because he too doubled what was there. But verse 18 describes a very different approach, one I'm afraid that sometimes we ourselves do. But the man who received the 1 talent went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. Even though we don't read about specific instructions for what to do with the money, the first 2 guys went to work and multiplied their investment. They doubled it. The 1 talent guy went off and buried his blessing. Now, don't misunderstand this. Burying valuable goods was a normal thing in that day. You'd take them and hide them, bury them in the ground, and only you knew where they were. So he knew that way he wouldn't lose it. Instead of operating out of a joy of the Lord, he operated out of fear. There's a story told about investing talents, putting your best to work. It goes like this. Antonio did not sing well. And because Antonio's voice was high and squeaky, he did not make the tryouts for the Cremona Boys Choir. When he tried to take violin lessons, the neighbors persuaded his parents to make him stop. Yet Antonio still wanted to make music. His friends gave him a hard time because his only talent was whittling. When Antonio was older, he served as an apprentice to a violin maker. His knack for whittling grew into a skill of carving, and his hobby soon became his craft. He worked patiently and faithfully, and by the time he died, he left over 1,500 violins, each one bearing a label that read, Antonio Stradivarius. They are the most sought-after violins in the world and sell for more than $100,000 each. Antonio couldn't sing or play or preach or teach, but his responsibility was to use his ability, and his violins are still making beautiful music over the world today. Our potential is God's gift to us. What we do with our gift is our gift to Him. It was once said, you are the only person who can use your ability. Are you investing what you've been given, regardless of how much it is? Or have you buried your blessing and kept it hidden from others? Last concept I want to bring up is what we do with what we have reveals our view of God. What we do with what we have reveals our view of God. As we come to the end of the text this morning, we see that the man who had been given 5 talents brought 5 more with him. The language is insightful here because he says, see, I have gained you 5 more. The word see means behold or look. He was eager to invest what he had been given, and now he's excited to show the master all that he has done. He's bubbling over with enthusiasm and is thoroughly thrilled. He couldn't wait to present his investment back to the master. And the man with the 2 talents approached this time of reckoning with the same enthusiasm and excitement. The master is thrilled for both of them because they demonstrated responsibility of their ability. It says the exact same thing to both of them. Well done, good and faithful servants. You have been faithful in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. And the master increased their resources. After they had proven themselves faithful, Jesus says a similar thing in Luke chapter 6, verse 38. He says, give, and it will be given to you. And these 2 faithful servants received affirmation. Great job, well done. I appreciate your good work and your faithfulness. They received promotion. Since you've done so well with what I've given you, I'm going to give you more responsibility and opportunity for growth. And they were given celebration. You made me very happy. Let's celebrate together. The phrase, well done, could be translated, excellent work, or wonderful. They were faithful, and they were called good because they had the right view of the master. Likewise, when we see who God is, we will want to be faithful and will focus on doing good things for His purposes. And God is looking for faithful people, for those who properly manage His resources for kingdom purposes. And when we're responsible for what we've been given, we'll be given more responsibility. I picture a smile on Jesus' face when he comes and says, "Come and share your master's happiness." But the one-talent guy came a bit more reluctantly to the master and said in verse 24, "I knew you were a hard man." Notice that was the first words out of his mouth. I knew. We could translate, I always knew. The other two guys kept the focus on the master when he returned. Master, you entrusted me. But the third guy had the wrong view of the master. And his mind had been made up even before the master put the talent in his hand. He looked at him as someone who was hard and harsh, and instead of loving and gracious. A.W. Tozer was right when he said, what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. If we view God as a tyrant, then we'll filter everything through that lens. Now, some of you might secretly be angry with God because you think He did something or didn't do something that you felt like He should have done or shouldn't have done. And as a result, your view of Him gets skewed. Your preconceived notions prevent you from seeing God as a God of grace. And as a result, you refuse to serve Him with what He's given you. See, when we blame God, we end up burying our blessings. In what ways are you burying your blessings? God has given you everything you have. He has entrusted you with all that you have in your life. When Jesus comes again, what will His kingdom look like? And how will you answer when He wants to see how you've invested what God has entrusted to you?